Alrighty, thank you so much for your patience and welcome again to the Relevant Series week. If you're unfamiliar with Relevant, it's a week-long series of talks really about the intersection of faith and life. And so today, a massive topic, a topic that's regularly wrestled with people from all across the spectrums of life, is the topic of suffering and how do we process suffering, particularly from a faith standpoint. So my name is Richard, and I am a pastor at a church here in downtown, Every Nation Church, that meets at Innes College, as well as we have a student group on U of T called Every Nation Campus, and I'm also one of the chaplains at U of T. So it's my privilege on behalf of the Relevant Series team, volunteers, and speakers to welcome you to this lunchtime talk. We're going to just begin shortly. We're going to do quickly a land acknowledgement. And so as Christian organizers of this event, we believe all land and all peoples were created by God. We want to acknowledge that the land in which U of T lies is the traditional territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nations, and the Métis Nation. We thank these first peoples who continue to live on these lands, care for them, and whose relationship to these lands existed long before the founding of Canada. We are grateful to be able to live, learn, and play on these lands. All right, so we want this to be a conversation. You're going to hear a speaker, but we really wanted this to be a dialogue and a conversation. The way that you can participate in that is to rip out your cell phone right now. You've got pizza in one hand, your phone in the other. And if you'll go to slido.com and enter in that code, relevant_God_suffering, you can submit a question as the talk is going on. You can also upvote a question. So you can scan through, and if there's a question there that you like or a question that you were going to ask, you can like it and it can get upvoted. And then at the end, we'll curate those and try to get through as many as possible. We don't have a lot of time for Q&A, but we certainly want to get to that part and interact with the topic that we're hearing today. All right, without further ado, I'm going to introduce today's speaker and give her the floor. Alycia Wood. While studying for a degree in criminal justice and sociology at Robert Wesleyan College, Alycia discovered apologetics, and it changed the course of her life. She went on to get a master's in social justice from Marygrove, and this led to various volunteering opportunities at orphanages, prisons, and shelters for the homeless in several countries, including Haiti, Honduras, Jamaica, and the Dominican Republic. Alycia was a substitute teacher and a paraprofessional for multiple grade levels and spent 9 years doing apologetics ministry before joining the C.S. Lewis Society, which is an apologetics ministry. So please join me in giving her a warm U of T welcome.
All right. Well, good afternoon. It's afternoon now, right? Good afternoon to you all. Wonderful to be with you. I was just at McGill University, Montreal last week. And I originally hail from Rochester, New York, so just the other side of the Canada border from you guys, actually. Some of you may be old enough to remember that Toronto-Rochester ferry that they tried out, like, I don't even know, 20 some odd years ago, to have something going between Rochester and Toronto on Lake Ontario. And it didn't last actually more than I think a week or two, because there was all kind of international trade issues. But the point was, growing up right on the Canada border, I played hockey. I mean, that's what you do, right? So I was a hockey player for 20 some odd years. Love Niagara Falls, still one of my most favorite places on the planet. And I've been there several times. And all that to say, I now live in, Hotlanta, and otherwise known as Atlanta, Georgia. And I've been there about 5 years. And I'm happy to be back here. Come up to the north with my northern friends who think a little bit more like me. So really good to be able to spend time with you today. I am dealing with a topic that isn't necessarily exciting and fun, and I recognize that. We're dealing with this topic of suffering. And so I come in and I depress you all. I mean, that's basically what happens. But it's something that we have to wrestle with as people. It's something that we have to wrestle with as individuals, because it's something that has happened. If it's not happened to you already, it's going to happen to you at some point. Just keep living. I guarantee you. You will end up in a situation where you'll be asking many of these questions. I remember one time I was speaking at a school in Boston, a church in Boston. And a young lady asked me this question, and the setup was there were round tables and maybe 6, 7, 8 people around the round tables in the room. And so, based on where you are in the circle, people have to turn their chairs to see me. So not everybody can kind of see this young lady, but she asked me this question about suffering. And as I'm responding, she just has tears pouring down her face. And you realize that this isn't just a question for her. There's probably something going on in her life right now that this is like, she's trying to understand how this could be happening. And so I recognize I'm going to do two things here with you today. I'm going to kind of approach it from a philosophical sense, which can be very offensive to somebody who's going through something right now. And I totally get that. So if you are someone who is just personally dealing with some kind of pain, some kind of agony, some level of suffering, and I start going philosophy on you, if you want to just shut that down for a second, because it's just too much for you to handle right now, I get it. But I want you to understand, I will get to something that's a bit more personal. But I do want to make sure I cover both areas for people here who are in different places. And so I don't want it to seem at all like I'm insensitive when I kind of go to a more philosophical thing, but I will get to something more personal. Okay. So with that said, I want to just kind of go ahead and give you the answer off the bat as to why God allows suffering. Sorry, we'll get to that one in a second. As to why I believe as a Christian that God does allow suffering. And I think, and the short answer is, and I will go through this and another reason as well as I go along, but the short answer simply being that there's many ways that God could have created a world. He could have created a world where people only did good things, where we had no sense of autonomy. In that world, though, if Christian God is true, which I believe, then it's a world in which you could have no atheists because you couldn't choose to not believe in God in that world. It's a world where you couldn't have any Hindus because you can't be a Hindu in that world. It's a world where I can only serve God. I can only believe in God. Therefore, do I really love him? Because remember, in this world, I don't have another choice. I can't choose to not. Right? So my only option is to serve this God. Does that mean I actually genuinely am serving it, or am I more of a robot who's programmed that way and has no other alternative option? So in a world where a possible world that God could created, where it was we didn't have any opportunity at all to choose anything but to serve him and know him, it's going to eliminate maybe some of the people in this room from ever even existing. It's going to eliminate other people in this room from having the life as they now know it to be that way. And so it would change everything. What about a world, which is where I think that he created, which is a world in which love was possible, in which relationship was possible. In other words, in this kind of a world, you have to actually be able to choose love, to be actually able to choose relationship, or it's not real relationships. Imagine I went up to one of you and said, tell me you love me, or I'm going to punch you right in the face. You might say, okay, I love you. But is that genuine love? Like, are you thinking, oh, Alycia, you're just amazing. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad I met you. Or you're thinking, let me just give her what she wants so I don't get harmed. In other words, when I take away your freedom of choice, how then does your feelings towards me or your mindset towards me then change? So God creates a world in which the possibility to not obey him, to not love him, to not know him is possible. And ultimately, that's the world that we find ourselves in today. So first, I'm going to go and jump into this philosophical kind of approach. But before I do that, I want to kind of look at what some other belief systems would say to this question of suffering. This question of suffering is not unique to Christianity. Everybody has to ask this question. So, possible answer for why suffering exists in a general sense. It's necessary for a greater good. Some people might say that. Some people say it is God's will. Some people say it's poor life decisions. Some people would say bad luck. Some people would say suffering is the result of past actions in a previous life and the fact that we desire so many things now. Some people would say it is someone else's problem. The Buddha, we have this quote here that the root of suffering is attachment. And then some others would say this is just how the world should be. So these are all different possible answers that people could give based on various religions and no religions and that kind of thing. In other words, every human being has to ask this question. It's not just a question for the Christian. We are all philosophers for thousands of years have been wrestling with this question. But this last one is interesting, which says this is how the world should be. The reason why this is interesting to me is this is traditionally a view that somebody who might be an atheist would hold. In other words, they might say, why would you expect that the world shouldn't have suffering? Like DNA doesn't care about your pain or your inadequacies or your discomfort. Like the trees aren't focused on your level of happiness. Like, why do you make the assumption that pain and suffering shouldn't exist? We're just dancing to our DNA. We live in a world that requires for some to die and some to get sick in order for others to live and thrive. This is the way the system works. So to make a charge against suffering that is an objection that's going to be opposite from this is just the way it is you're going to have to believe two things then about humanity. You're going to have to believe that humans have value, and you're also going to have to believe that there's a moral right or wrong. You can't say that what somebody did to somebody else is wrong and how they made them suffer is wrong without making the assumption or the belief, holding the belief that there is a moral wrong that's been violated, and also that there's a value to a human life that's been violated. Neither of which is a view that an atheist can hold, because that would be a view that they actually would deny. They would deny inherent human value. We create our value. They would deny an objective moral law. We create a moral law. But that would go for multiple belief systems as well. So this idea that there's something unique about humans versus the animal kingdom makes suffering harder to accept when it happens to people. Why? Because we believe that there's certain ways to treat people. If I wake up in the morning and I step on an ant, nobody cares. If I wake up in the morning and step on my ant, we have a problem. What is the difference? We see her worth to be something that should be honored. And so we are immediately implying that humans are something to be revered. It's why nobody ever says to me, why would God allow suffering and allow a hurricane on this barren island where 14 trees tipped over? Nobody's asked me about a hurricane on a barren island where trees tipped over. What they ask me about are tsunamis that kill people. In other words, our issue with suffering is when it affects us. But that's because we are making the assumption that humans have value. I fully believe humans have value, but I get that from my Christian view, which tells us that very thing. So the problem of suffering is really a problem more for Christianity than for any other faith or even non-faith, because Christianity presents an all-powerful, all-good personal God who gives humans worth. And he lays down a moral code for them to live by. Herein lies the paradox and the real question and answer to why. So the argument against God, if humans have value and there's a moral right and wrong, the argument against God therefore goes like this. If an all-powerful and good God exists, then he wouldn't allow suffering. Suffering exists. Therefore, the Christian, I'm going to speak specifically for the Christian God today because different views are going to have different answers. Therefore, the Christian God doesn't exist. In other words, if an all-powerful and good God exists, the minute you say good, the minute you're implying there's a moral accountability there. Okay? That morality exists. So this God, if there's a morally good God, then he wouldn't allow suffering to people, is the implication here. Okay? Nobody's asking me this question about why did I just damage the chair? And why would God allow me to do that? Okay? But yes, suffering exists. Therefore, the Christian God who believes in morality and who believes in human value cannot possibly exist. That is the ultimate question here. How is it possible that suffering and a good God who has a moral framework and believes humans have value exist? How can both of these exist at the same time? It seems like it would need to be no God and suffering or God and no suffering. So while there's many answers you can look at, I'm just going to go, we have a short time today, so I'm just going to go through two with you. And I went through this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to unpack it a bit more. Since the ultimate root of suffering is free will, what would the world look like without it? The answer to this is closely linked and closely linked and related to the reason why we are here. Ultimately, the Christian view would say that God wasn't bored before he created the earth and you. He wasn't like, man, eternity past has been a long time. I need some new faces. I need some new conversation. I need something to do. Oh, I guess I'll just create people. That actually isn't the Christian message. God was fully fine without us. He was fully complete. He wasn't in need of anything. He wasn't lacking anything. But he wanted to share what he had. He wanted to share beautiful, perfect relationship and love. Humans are created, not because God was bored, but because God wanted us to experience relationship with him, to experience something extremely meaningful, extremely beautiful. So the idea of God is that, in a general philosophical sense, is that it's the highest, most perfect, powerful being, all knowledgeable, morally perfect, etc. So to bring us into experiencing that, it wasn't for him, it was for us. So in order to bring us into a relationship, you got to go back to what I said in the beginning. Your relationship must be a choice. Love must be a choice. Imagine if I said, brought a couple up here and they've been married, let's say for 60 years. So they're in their 80s. They're married for 60 years. And I say to this man here, I said, why her? Why did you choose her? And if his response was, well, Alycia, I went to this birthday party one day and asked out 10 other girls and they all turned me down. And so there really wasn't any other choice. So I just kind of had to settle on her. How is that going to make her feel? You were just my default. You were just my settle. But if he said, I went to a birthday party and there were so many beautiful women there, but then I saw her and then I got to talk to her and I realized, wow, she's pretty amazing. What does that do to change the nature of their relationship? The minute you can freely choose to be in something, it changes the way in which you treat it, honor it, love it. And so what God is going to do is create a system where love can exist. And so I personally conclude that evil and suffering is the price that we pay for the gift of being free. For the gift of being free. But we also need to remember, and this is something that I think oftentimes people forget, is a lot of the suffering that we go with is because of the decisions of other people. So people use their free choice and their free will to harm others. I want to give you some statistics on India real quick. India is known to be approximately the third in the world's poorest nations, based on statistics. In 2010, over 32% of Indians lived below the poverty line, which is used internationally at $1.25 US a day. That's the standard that they use, $1.25 US. So 32% of Indians were below the poverty line, while more than 68% earn a living at $2 a day. So just above it. Now, with that in mind, I want you to meet this man here. This is a gentleman in India who has pieces of his wardrobe made of gold. His shirt weighs 3.3 kilograms and took 15 days to make. 16 people had to work to make that shirt. It cost $250,000. Remember what I talked to you about the statistics in India, where 30% are below the poverty line, which is $1.25 a day. You do all the math on these kind of things, and then you got some that are living around $2 a day. You do the math, that's approximately $456 a year, depending if you use the 1.25 or the 2, whatever. In other words, if he had taken the money he used to make his shirt and given it to people, he could have doubled the salaries of about 548 people in India. And they would only be making $912 a year. But he made a shirt. You can see other things that he made, his rings and this other gold pendant first thing that he made as well. Why am I pointing? I'm not picking on him or pointing him out. What I'm saying is I just want us to be aware that we aren't necessarily always innocent when it comes to the suffering. What is it that we do? What is it that we've done? And so while we're pointing the finger at God, like, what are you doing? Is he pointing his finger back at us and saying, what are you doing? Something for us to just keep in mind is sometimes people suffer because of the decisions of other people. It's how we get things like slavery. It's how we get things like human trafficking. It's how we get a multitude of crimes. Our prisons are filled with people who use their free choice to hurt somebody else. And sometimes the suffering is because of what we have done to other people. Now, couldn't God intervene in that? Absolutely. But I want you to understand what that looks like. You are furiously angry with this person for whatever they did to you, and you're just going to go and tell them off. You're going to run your mouth and tell them exactly what you think about them. So you go up to them and you're going to do this bad thing, and you go to open your mouth and like you can't talk. Like nothing comes out because God is stopping you from doing something wrong. And you're like, it can't come out. If God was to intervene on every one of these situations, what kind of quality life would you have? Every time you wanted to do something, it was like, that was wrong. He would stop you. And now what's going to happen? Are you going to be like, wow, God, you're so great. Thank you for stopping me from doing these things. Or are you going to be like, would you leave me alone? Would you get away from me? You're so prohibitive. I can't live because you keep getting in my way. If God stopped every single one of these things, you would hate him. You would feel like you didn't have any freedom. And so he does allow for many of these things to continue, so we can actually have a relationship with him. Now, I've given you philosophical reasons for suffering. And how many of you feel really great about it now? Like you feel like, you know what? I'm going to walk by a starving child and I'm going to feel, hey, this is no big deal. Like I know why you're suffering because I can have a relationship with God. So hope maybe you get a cracker today. Guys, I don't want you ever to hear anybody ever give you an answer to the problem of suffering that no longer makes you hurt. There's no answer I ever want to give anybody that no longer makes them cry over injustice, cry over pain, cry over a death of a loved one. I don't want to make suffering any less painful for you. I think it should hurt because I think it hurts God. So I hope you don't feel better. That wasn't my goal. My goal was to say, is it possible that God could be good, hold a moral framework, and believe humans have value, and have reasons for allowing suffering? My goal was to answer it philosophically. But the reality is, it doesn't make us feel any better. So the next thing I think we need to consider then is, where's God? If this isn't going to make me feel any better and he's going to put me in this situation, then where in the world is he? This is where I think Christianity is unique, because it says that God is close. Imagine you're 4 years old again. You can think back to that. I'm sure you don't remember it, but we're going to pretend. And you're still learning how to ride a bike. And you think you're doing great. So you're on that bike and you're going down the street and everything's great until you go, whoop, boom, fall, scrape your knees. What's the first thing you're going to do? Mom, and you're crying and the blood is pouring down your knee. So mom comes out. What does she do? Does she sit there and tell you about how gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared and talk to you about how your blood is going to coagulate so that all the blood in your body doesn't pour out of your knee? And does she give you some big, like, explanatory conversation or response? Or does she just pick you up and hold you? And when mom picks you up and holds you, what happens? You're burying your face in her chest, and your tears are getting on her. That blood that was pouring down your knee, it's now dribbling down her arm. But mom wanted to be there in your pain, to comfort you because of her love for you. This isn't the time for explanations. That's not what you need. It's not going to make you feel better. In that moment, all you want is mom. And so that's why she shows up and does what she did. There are times, my friends, when I think answering the question of why does God allow suffering can actually make the pain worse. We think that if we get the answer, it's going to make us better. It's why we keep asking us, why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow suffering? And no answer seems to satisfy us for thousands of years across religions, across philosophers. And so we keep asking because we're waiting for that one answer that's going to make suffering not hurt. But it never should. No answer should ever make it not hurt. But we also assume that if I get the answer, it's going to make my pain go away. I remember I was in England, 10 years ago now. It's crazy to think that. I was in England and I was speaking with a young high school student. She's about 16 years old. And she said to me, she goes, Alycia, she was trying to figure out the Christian thing, wasn't really Christian, didn't really know what to think. She goes, my dad was an alcoholic and we tried to help him. We brought him to doctors and therapists. We did all these things to help him. But yet he died from the alcohol. Why did God allow that? Now, in that moment, I'm sure all of you in here were glad you weren't me. But let's say, the short answer is, I don't have an answer for why God allowed what happened to your dad to happen. I don't have a specific answer for what happened to your dad. I've never met him. I don't know. I'm just learning this from you. But let's say I did. Let's say I left her that day, went back. Maybe I had a great dream or something happened where God showed me, Alycia, this is why this happened to her dad. I'm like, okay. So next I go back to her. I'm like, guess what? I got your answer. I know why God allowed this to happen to your dad. The reason why your dad died is because he drank so much. And the reason he drank so much is because he never wanted kids. So when you and your brother were born, it just sent him into a spiral and he didn't know what to do. So he drank. So now you have your answer. That's what she wanted. But did it make her feel better? In fact, did the answer make her feel worse? Guys, there's times when I think that God intentionally withholds the answers to some of these questions because it wouldn't make the pain go away, it would make the pain intensify. And so sometimes we aren't going to know, and that might actually be the best thing. I want to look at a couple of situations, people who have gone through rough situations. The first is going to be of a woman named Corrie ten Boom. She was born in 1892 in Amsterdam. She was a Dutch Christian and author, and she wrote over 55 books, right? Like, what am I doing with my life, right? 55 books. She became known, her and her family were known for hiding the Jews during World War II. It's estimated that through her family and friends, they were able to save the lives of about 800 Jewish people until they were arrested. They were caught and arrested February 28, 1944. They hid them in every crevice of their house, every place they could find, they were hiding the Jews. But her and her family were sent to prison. Her father died in prison. I believe her sister did as well. And she survived because they were trying to save their lives. The beginning part of her prison stay included 7 weeks in solitary confinement before she was allowed to step outside for the first time. Now, I was a criminal justice major. We looked at these kind of things. Solitary confinement is very unhealthy. We are, even as introverts, which I am, believe it or not, introvert, we are also very relational beings. And isolating people for extended periods of time actually turns out that it's very unhealthy for them. And so they've made a lot of adjustments on solitary confinement rules in prison for that very reason. So to be in solitary confinement for 7 weeks is an extremely long time. And during that time, she talks of the physical and the mental and emotional pain that she went through, as well as the desolation of loneliness. And so she writes these words: biscuits, a croquette, caramels. But why did I take no delight in these things? There was really no pleasure in nibbling at this or that dainty by myself. It occurred to me to offer some to the Wachtmeisteren, which are the guards that were there, but I let the impulse pass. I knew I should never in the future, was there to be a future, eat dainties by myself. If ever I had anything good to eat, I should remember cell 384 and invite others to enjoy it with me. It was dark in my cell. I talked with my God. Never before had fellowship with him been so close. It was a joy I hoped would continue unchanged. I was a prisoner, and yet how free. She goes on to talk about how I was no longer alone. God was with me. With him, I could go on. And once more, I saw the blue sky, the flowers and shrubs, and I saw the garden as a part of a beautiful free world in which I too should someday be able to walk about. The earth is, in much the same way, a solitary prison garden, and heaven is the great free out of doors where fulfillment of joy awaits us, the children of God. If we notice, guys, her comfort didn't come in finding out why God was allowing her to go through this when she done something good. I was helping these people. And God, this is where you have me end up. Her comfort didn't come from God giving her the why. Rather, she found comfort in the fact that she felt that he was in that solitary confinement room with her. He was in the cell with her. He was in her pain with her. Going back to that situation of the mom who picks up the child who's fallen off of their bicycle, tears on the mom's shirt, sweat and dirt on the mom's shirt, blood dripping down her arms. At that moment, while that child is fully in pain, mom is enough. They don't even necessarily feel the pain in the same way because they're so focused on just crying in mom's arms. And now they have to find the strength to stand up and walk and move again, but they can because mom's holding their hand. They're not healed. They're going to have scars, but mom somehow makes things livable. The divinity of Jesus makes God perfect. Makes God personal. The idea that Jesus is God, fully God, comes to earth, leaves a place of no suffering to enter into a world of suffering so that he could pick you up and hold you in those pains, in that pain. And in so doing, he experiences suffering himself. Listen to this poem. It says, if we have never sought thee, we seek thee now. Thine eyes burn through the dark, our only stars. We must have sight of thorn pricks on thy brow. We must have thee, O Jesus, of the scars. The heavens frighten us. They are too calm. In all the universe, we have no place. Our wounds are hurting us. Where is the balm? Lord Jesus, by thy scars, we claim thy grace. If when the doors are shut, thou drawest near, only reveal those hands at side of thine. We know today what wounds are. Have no fear. Show us thy scars. We know the countersign. The other gods were strong, but thou wast weak. They rode, but thou didst stumble to a throne. But to our wounds, only God's wounds can speak. And not a God has wounds, but thou alone. I think it was Dostoevsky or someone who said that I may not know the answer for suffering, but I know that no other God has scars. And in Christianity, we talk of a God who comes to earth, eats like we do, walks like we do, talks, hangs out, does all those things, but then suffers excruciating pain by being crucified. And he suffers. And the crucifixion essentially tells us, look, I get it. While I'm on this cross, dying because of all the things that you've done wrong, all of us have done wrong, whether we've caused suffering people or not, I'm dying because somebody has to pay the penalty for what we've done wrong. If for God to be a good judge and to have us with him for eternity, he can't just forgive you guys. No good judge just lets people go. A good judge has to punish. None of you would go to court and think a judge was just for letting somebody go who committed a crime without there being some sort of sentence. God has to carry out judgment, and he carries it out on himself instead of us. And the cross tells us that that's what Jesus is doing. And it costs him a lot of pain, and it costs him a lot of agony. But we also know that we have the ability to one day know that the suffering will stop. To one day know that the pain will one day be gone. This world is temporary, but the new world will be eternal. And I just will close on this last final verse from the last book of the Bible, actually, where they talk about what the world without suffering will one day look like. And it simply says this. The author John says, I saw earth, a new earth. The first earth had passed away, which is this earth, and there was no more sea. I saw this holy city coming down out of heaven from God. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, look, God is going to live with men, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. God will wipe away all tears from their eyes. There'll be no more death, nor will there be any more sorrow, nor crying, nor pain, for the old things have gone away.
Alycia, thank you so much for that. I'm also going to draw your attention to, I believe we do have a video getting ready to roll, is something called Christianity Explored. Perhaps you're new to Christianity, perhaps you're still figuring all this stuff out, and this is a great place for you to take next step. It's over several weeks of free food, short conversations around the Bible, and a video. And I think it's going to be a great way for you to take further some of these things that you might be asking and exploring as you thinking about Christianity. And so if you guys have that ready to go, we can just have a quick look at Christianity Explored, and you can also make use of the feedback form if you'd like to indicate
you might be a convinced atheist,
your interest in that.
You might be a convinced atheist, a committed Christian, or somewhere in between. Perhaps you've lots of questions to ask, or perhaps you're happier just sitting and listening. Maybe you go to church, or maybe you've never been. Whoever you are, Christianity Explored is a place for you to explore what life is all about. The Christianity Explored course is free, it's relaxed and informal, and it's run by ordinary people local to you. Some courses are held in churches with lots of people. Some are held in people's houses with just a few friends getting together. Wherever you meet, in each session, there's a chance to look at the life of Jesus for yourself and ask any questions you have. There's a short video to watch, and then a chance to chat about what you've just heard. You'll meet great people. You won't be asked to sing or pray or read out loud, and you don't need to know anything about the Bible to enjoy it. So whoever you are, come and explore. There's almost certainly a Christianity Explored course starting near you soon. So ask a Christian friend, or check out the website to find out more. You might just discover that the Christian message really is the best news you've ever heard.
Christianity Explored starting near you. It's starting this Monday, 6 p.m. And so if you would like to get more information about that, please make use of that follow-up form. I would love to get some more details about that so you can start that journey, as well as any general feedback you'd like to give. All right, we're running out of time, and I would really love to get to some Q&A. And so I want to invite Alycia back up, and she's going to be joined by Logan Gates. Let me introduce Logan to you. Some of you are familiar with Logan, but Logan is a PhD candidate in political theory at U of T, studying the emergence of human rights and early modern political thought. He is also an ordained priest in the Anglican Network in Canada, and an adjunct speaker with Apologetics Canada, and has spoken on tough questions about the Christian faith on university campuses across the country, and has been part of relevant series in the past. And so we're going to fire some questions at these guys and hopefully get through as many of them as possible. And so here we go. Suffering, and either of you can jump in, or both of you as well. Suffering quickly feels overwhelming and intolerable, sometimes overtaking people in tragic ways. Can't God put a limit on the quality and quantity of suffering? I think there's mics behind you that you guys can.
Great. Well, good to have you here again. My name is Logan, and thanks so much, Alycia. Thanks, Richard. I think this is a great question, because we have in mind not just the problem of suffering, but seeing people go through suffering in such a way that it just seems to crush them. And I think that when I think of this as a Christian, I think I see very clearly, and maybe you guys have examples of this in your life, where you have people around you who have suffered, and it has taken that path and really crushed them, and maybe led to issues that have become chronic. I mean, we live in Toronto, we see homeless people on the street all the time, and many of them aren't there by bad decisions they independently made in this great life they were living. Instead, something really hard happened to them. And in result of that, they just weren't able to be able to continue in the way they were. But then I think on the other hand, we do see that that some people go through suffering and it has this kind of refining function. You have people who say, like, I think I'm a political theory student. And so in the book, The Republic, there's this figure called Cephalus at the beginning, and he's an old man. And Socrates asks him, what's it like to be an old man? Not a very gentle question to ask an older person. But Cephalus says, one thing that he's thinking a lot about is his character. He says people who get to the end of their life and suddenly the pleasures of life go away, they begin to think more about who they really are. And so Cephalus is spending all his days now sacrificing to please whatever god he feels that he has offended. He's kind of a comic character in Plato, and the rest of the dialogue continues. But there's something I think significant that the ancient world got that we miss, in the sense of suffering having the potential of calling our focus to things that really matter, that we don't tend to think as much about. Things like relationships, things like our character, and I think also the question of God. And so I think what I would say is, I think, again, it comes down to this question of what kind of world would we like God to have made? And if it is a world in which we could have not only genuine relationship with one another, but even a genuine relationship with God, I think that has to give us the opportunity to say no to him. And I saw another question on Slido related to this question of hell, and I'll just touch on this deep, hard issue, but just to say, in the Christian understanding, what makes hell hell is the absence of God. In other words, it's not necessarily that there's devils in red tights or flames all around you all the time, but like what makes hell so awful is that God, who in some sense is present in our world by what theologians call common grace. There are good things in this world, in part because God is present here in certain ways. But to remove that entirely, that is what the Bible presents us as hell. And yet I think at the same time, the question is, when we think of it in relational terms, if hell is God's absence, what then does that mean for people who are deciding whether they'll want to have a relationship with God? I think when I asked my wife to marry me, she wasn't my wife at the time. When I asked her, I didn't do it with a gun to her head, because if she said yes, that wouldn't be a very sincere yes. And I think the reason was I had to give her the chance to say no to me. And so I think in the same way with God, when we go through suffering, I think that God gives us the chance to say no to him. And I think that makes our suffering that much more, because we are ultimately alone. And that's a hard thing to bear when you're suffering. But I think he also gives us the chance, because he loves us, to say yes to him. And I think that sometimes it is suffering that opens up our awareness to the fact that we need a solid foundation. The question is, what's going to get us through? And I think that God wants to give us that chance to say yes to him.
That's so good. I have a cousin who was adopted from somewhere, I believe in Eastern Europe. And while she was in the orphanage there, she contracted polio. And as a result, when she came to America, she had issues with the leg that the polio she contracted, and it was damaged. I think she may have lost some of the muscle in that leg, actually. And so as a result, as she grew to her teenage years, one leg was significantly shorter than the other leg. And so the doctors were like, well, we can stretch one leg. We can work on that. It's going to be painful. We're gonna have to put you basically in a wheelchair for middle school. And every night we're gonna adjust screws and things like that to stretch that leg to get it 1 inch. And they did it for a year, and they were able to stretch it for 1 inch, and it was horrible and it was painful. And they did it for a second year to stretch it 2 inches. And when you talk to her, she's an adult now. She's gotten married since. She can't drive because of her inability to use the leg in the proper way. But she would talk about how, because of the suffering that she's gone through, she's so much more compassionate on those who have other physical issues, because she's been through it. She knows what that's like. She knows what it's like to be embarrassed when you're in middle school and you're in a wheelchair and everybody else is walking around in really cool clothes and playing sports and you're just stuck. And so that built in her a sense of compassion and understanding. And one final thought on this question here about couldn't have God have just limited it in some way. I fully understand your question. I think he very well may be. We have to understand and remember, guys, the only bits of suffering that we see are the suffering that God didn't stop. We don't know the sufferings that he did stop because we never see them. There could be way more things that could and should have been happening, but he stops it, but he's allowed these to go through. So I think it is quite possible actually that he does actually limit what actually does come our way.
It's great stuff. All right, maybe tied into the polio case, why does God allow diseases like Alzheimer's, something that's suffering, but not from the result of free will? You talked about free will, free choice. Yeah,
exactly. So it's a common a term which is called like natural suffering, like natural diseases and things like that, cancers and the like. And I think one of the things that we have to remember, guys, is within the Christian framework, when God creates, everything's great and good. But after Adam and Eve chose to do their own thing, after humanity chose to disobey God, and now started a downward trajectory, and we are now on a downward trajectory towards death. Towards death. That's just the reality of the situation. Which there's an aspect to me, which I wonder if there's an aspect of that that's somewhat merciful, that we don't have to live in a world where people could torture each other endlessly and they never be able to die to end the pain. So there's a sense in which I wonder, at least death puts a limit, getting back to limitations, it puts a limit upon what we are actually going to have to endure in this world of suffering and agony. But with that said, keep in mind now, if the trajectory is death, but there's only so many ways that that's going to happen, right? We can either hurt ourselves or hurt each other. We can get these diseases. We can die in a natural disaster. But these, a hurricane, tornado, tsunami, all these kind of things. So these deterioration of our bodies is just following this natural decline towards death. And it's going to happen one way. So if it's not Alzheimer's, it might happen in a car accident. It might happen with a tsunami. The point is, there's multiple ways that we're going to get there, but we are going to get to that end. And so that is just one of the ways that deterioration is going to happen. Our bodies no longer are able to live, I guess you could say eternally at this stage, what we're in right now. Death is going, they say to you, as you get older, you probably hear this more, but they say the two most certain things in life are death and taxes. That's true. Don't mess with the government. They will come after you. They got better lawyers. Taxes will come your way, and death. We can't escape it. So it's one of the many ways in which, yeah, you're right. So it isn't necessarily caused, but by something that we've done to each other. Sometimes it is, but not necessarily because we've done to each other, but it is part of this framework, this world that we now live in, where everything is on that downward trajectory.
Okay, we're actually out of time. We want to honor time. If some of you got maybe a class to go to, but maybe just 30 seconds. Any final thoughts? I'm sure they're going to stick around afterwards. For those of you who don't have to rush off. But we do want to respect those that need to get to where they need to get to. But maybe a concluding thought. You actually answered 2 in 1 questions, Logan. Some experience showing there. You touched on the hell question and free choice. That was one of the popular ones. Alycia, any closing thoughts?
This still hurts, right? Suffering and pain, it hurts. And I think that's a good thing. Because if we didn't feel, what kind of people we'd be, guys, if we didn't cry over suffering? I want you to think about that. What kind of person what kind of human race would we be if suffering and pain didn't bother us? What kind of people could we then become? So I know it hurts, but I hope that what you take away from even the things that we've said today is the idea that God knows it hurts too, and it hurts him. And so he doesn't want us to walk alone in the pain in this world. He wants to walk with us because he too has suffered. He too knows. That's why mom can pick up that kid when they fall off the bike, because mom has 2 scarred knees. She's fallen too. She knows what it's like. And I hope that in the dichotomy and the agony of it all, that's what we can remember, a God who has scars.
Yeah, I just would say what a hard thing it is to go through suffering alone. And maybe if you are here and don't know even where you stand with God or that kind of thing, I just hope that you have people you can walk with. And I think that the team at Relevant is the kind of team I think that, is just glad to be present with you in that suffering. And I think that we are here and putting on these events this week because we believe that as great as someone is like Alycia to sit down and walk with, and I'm sure she'd be glad to sit and chat more, I think we also firmly believe that there is a God, of such a kind of God, that wants to be able to be for you and get you through and be a foundation that will hold you steady when you feel everything else is giving way.
Yeah.
So good. That was a question as well of just why doesn't God show more tangible ways to console us when we go through suffering? And I think the answer is he does, and it's through people and through community that you can find that there's safe places here on campus or church community or a student group that really could come alongside you and be the hands and feet of Jesus really in those moments. And so it's a great way to remind us that you're not to suffer alone, not to be alone. And also, if you have questions about faith, again, there's some great ways that you can explore that. Christianity Explored. Alycia and Logan will be here for a few minutes afterwards if you want to come and direct their questions. But I would just like to say, on behalf of the volunteers and the team here at Relevant Series, thank you so much, Alycia, for coming and sharing that talk. I know you got a lunchtime talk tomorrow as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, because it's going to get even better. Jesus and the failures of the church. It's like they bring the American in to deal with all the painful subjects.
That's exactly
no, I'm
what
joking. Jesus and the failures of the church. Because while I'm a Christian, I do belong to a church body that has messed up a lot. And we will talk about how in the world we could even believe in a God after all of that pain.
Awesome. You can check out relevantseries.com for all the schedule and the talks. There's tonight talks, tomorrow lunchtime, tomorrow evening, and even Friday. Thank you so much for coming. There's some pizza. If there's still pizza, you can grab some on the way. If you want to come up and speak, you're welcome to do that. But thank you so much for coming.